Have you ever had a color come out too warm, too dark, too light, or just off, and you blame the formula? I want you to consider something. The formula might have been perfect. Your developer might have been what destroyed it. Most colorists treat developer like an afterthought. 10 volume for deposit, 20 for lift, 30 if you just want a little bit. That's not color theory, that's just guessing. It's costing you your client's results. Here's exactly how developer actually works. And the 3 mistakes that I've seen a lot of stylists make, and I did a few times as well. Developer is hydrogen peroxide, but concentration changes everything. Volume is just a measure of how much oxygen gas is being released per volume of liquid. 10 volume is 3% peroxide, 20 volume is 6%, 30 volume is 9%, and 40 volume is 12%. Here's what that oxygen is doing inside of the cortex. It's oxidizing the melanin, breaking down the natural pigment, will simultaneously polymerize the artificial color molecule so that they lock into their hair shaft. Those 2 jobs happen at the same time. This is where most people go wrong. More developer doesn't just mean more lift. It means more oxidization of everything, including the artificial pigment you just paid for. Think of it as a seesaw. Higher volume, more lift, lower deposit. Lower volume, less lift, higher deposit. Which is why a rich, dark deposit formula that you would use a 20 developer on gray resistant hair will not look the same as if you put it on a regular client. It would come out maybe lighter, it would come out flat, faded, it would wash out in a couple weeks because you'd be blowing these cuticles out that don't need that 20 developer. And to understand that, you're gonna have to understand how the hair is made up and the process and physiology of that. It can cause you to lift when you're trying to fill. So one of the rules of depositing, toning, refreshing, and going darker should all be a 10 volume. Great coverage on resistant hair should be a 20. If you're trying to do 1 to 2 levels of lift, you should do a 30 volume. If you're trying to do 2 to 3 levels of lift, you should use a 40, but you should have a really good reason on why you're trying to do a 40, because color corrections ideally should not be all done in one day. It's very damaging to the hair. Now, of course, there's some contingencies to this, right? If you lift a client who has gray hair, you end up blowing the cuticle out, and then you don't have to use a 20 for deposit. Use a regular 10 developer. Use a 5 depending on the needs of the client. 5 is a much gentler, softer developer and isn't as aggressive, and you're basically going to be extending the time of which you will be having a processing. Now, I've seen a lot of hairstylists, especially when you're first starting out, that you forget to use a 20 on color resistant hair, so grays, and you end up using a 10, or you do your go-to with the color system. And this is why you have to be very vigilant and aware not only of your formula, but who's in your chair and their hair, their porosity, all of the above. So that is one of the common mistakes that I've seen, is a lot of people tend to default to a 10 or a 20 when they are either coloring or lifting. Now, there are some other situations where if someone has super porous hair, like I had a client come in who someone decided to put 8 bleach baths on her hair back to back, I can't go in with a crazy light, like a lightener with that, you know, because her hair is probably gonna fry off. And you honestly shouldn't even be color correcting that in the first place. You have to do a healing journey. And that's another step that we'll talk about in a bit. Mistake number 2 is that they use high volume on compromised hair, which is what I was just discussing. Porous or previously lifted hair, high porosity hair means that the cuticles are already open, so they're more susceptible to damage. The peroxide will penetrate faster and more aggressively when the hair has high porosity. A level 30 or 40 on this type of hair can cause an uneven lift, or even worse, cause damage to that client's hair where it starts breaking off and snapping. So cause hot root, color that fades within days. What I recommend with that is if you do have a client that has compromised hair and you feel confident in that you'll be able to successfully begin a color correction or a lift on this client, I recommend dropping down in volume and you extend the processing time and you make it multiple appointments if it is a color correction. Mistake number 3, ignoring the manufacturer ratios. There's 1-to-1, there's 1-to-2, 1-to-1-to-5. These aren't suggestions, okay? The manufacturer did their tests and their studies to make sure that their product would be deposited evenly. And to do this, like, you have to follow those manufacturer guidelines. He has different ratios, and it's important to know the color line that you are working with. This will change your lift, it will change your deposit, and it will change the overall end result that your client had. And if your ratio is off, everything else could have gone right, but that can actually cause big issues with the amount of color that is deposited. Essentially, you could be flying in blind to your end result. So here's what I use when I'm working at the bowl to make my decision. 1, what is the natural level, or the level that we're currently at? What is the target level that my client wants to achieve? Is their hair compromised? So can I achieve this? Do I need multiple appointments? And the final one is, am I prioritizing lift or deposit at this point? From those 4 answers, it's gonna pick the deposit itself. Going from a 5 to a 7 on virgin hair, you can lift with a 20 or 30. Level 9, use a 10 developer. Brushing the ends that already has a level 6 on them, you can use a 10 for that. That's because the hair is already treated, which means that cuticle is already open. Covering resistant gray, you would use a 20. Doing a full lift from a 4 to a 9, a 2 appointment. Ideally, you wouldn't even want to attempt to do that in one setting. As a beginner, that is not something I would recommend you doing without a deep understanding and knowledge of the difference between your developer. Precision instrument, and we have to treat it like it is. The colors that are getting consistent, repeatable results aren't doing anything magic. They're just making deliberate choices every step, including the ones that most people just automate. Basically, what that means is that when the things you learned at school, you didn't continue your education outside of it, so you're just in repetition of what the school taught you. To be honest, 90% of what's taught at school is either the bare minimum, wrong, or lacking a ton of information behind it. And that there's 1,000 other ways to do the same thing to accomplish the same goal. This next video, we're gonna dig into color corrections real quick, and then we're gonna go ahead and start talking about the physiology and how hair sits and the makeup of hair more in depth as well. I did do a previous video on that, but I think we can dive a little deeper into it. And we're gonna specifically talk in the color correction videos on how to fix mistakes that we discussed in this video. And subscribe if you don't wanna miss it.